begin today. Yet another poll showing Americans think President Biden's age is a problem when it comes to a second term. This is the Faulkner Focus, and I'm John Roberts in for Harris. 77% say they don't think that he could effectively carry out 4 more years in the White House. Among members of the president's own party, that number is nearly 70%. Yes, that's Democrats saying that. Progressive lawmakers, Biden's re-election campaign, and his administration all deflecting on the issue.
We will happily to discuss as it relates to age, what the president has been able to do and how he's been able to deliver.
That same poll gave people a list of words that they could use to describe the 80-year-old president. 26% of respondents picked things like old, retire, elderly, senile, dementia. Respondents were given the same choices for 77-year-old former President Trump. Only 1% went for age-related terms. Most people chose words like corrupt and crooked. Charlie Hurt, Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor, is with us now, along with Leslie Marshall, also a Fox News contributor. So, Leslie, let me ask you the blunt question. Is Biden too old to effectively serve another 4-year term?
Absolutely not. You know, one of the things that working in my husband's medical practice years ago showed me is that you can have 2 very different 90s. I've seen people who play tennis and travel around the world, and I've seen people in wheelchairs who are in assisted living communities. We age differently. And I think it's interesting, John, that we are in a society right now where people are trying to, you know, push people to work longer and increase the retirement age. Yeah, oh, you're too old to be president. At the end of the day, even though age is bothersome to a lot of voters on both sides of the aisle, and Donald Trump, as you pointed out, is not a spring chicken, I think when we just look at the data from the last general elections, Democrats will vote for the Democratic candidate, Republicans will vote for the Republican candidate largely, and it's going to come down to about 5 swing states and independent voters within those states to make that determination.
Charlie, to Leslie's point there, people do age at different rates. Some people's 90 is other people's 70. How would you describe Biden's 80?
Well, I mean, I think that the most obvious example of people aging differently is to look at a guy like Donald Trump compared to a guy like Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is definitely a very old 80 when you take into consider half the time when he's talking, the White House has to sort of keep him from doing things because when he goes out there and talks, you have no idea. On a good day, you have no idea what he's talking about. On a bad day, he's like making up stories, claiming to be places he wasn't, claiming things happened to him that didn't happen to him. And you go from being sort of an old 80 into full-blown senility. But I have to, give the guy some props for the fact that, I mean, you can't get 77% of Americans to agree on anything. But the idea that 77% of Americans agree that Joe Biden is too old to run for re-election in a normal political time, John, we've covered politics for a long time. In a normal political era, you would look at 77% of Americans believing that a politician should retire and go home. That would be lights out. But for some reason, in this era, we're just going to keep limping along and I guess see Joe Biden try to run for re-election, which seems impossible. But
what's interesting is that in that same AP poll, a majority of Americans thought that there should be an age limit on running for president. But let's get back to the word association, Leslie, that was contained in that AP poll. We'll put this up and take a look at this. 26% of people used words like old, outdated, retire, elderly, aging, senile, dementia to describe Joe Biden. 15% said slow, confused, idiot, ignorant, sleepy, gaffe, and bumbling. I mean, that's 40%, 41% of people. There are a lot of people, Leslie, out there, yourself not among them, who believe that maybe he just is a little, I don't want to say past his prime because somebody else got in a lot of trouble for saying that once, but that he may not be up to the job.
Yeah, but look, the people are going to say that, right? I mean, leading up, anybody on the right is going to, like I've already said, to a Republican, if a Democrat walks on water, they're going to say, well, the tide was really low. That's the reality. But the reality also is that voters' top 10, whether you're Democrat or Republican, issues are not the age of the candidate. They are kitchen table issues. They're the economy. There are other issues. And that's what they're going to look at. Like I said, our country's very divided. But you look at the exit polling for cycles of the general election for the past few general elections. And the reality is in this nation that we are pretty split among Democrats voting for Democrats, Republicans voting for Republicans, even if they hold their nose to do it. Remember, majority of people don't think Trump should run again, and he is. So at the end of the day, that's what those people are going to do. A Democrat's going to look at Republicans and say, I just don't agree with them on these policies. Republicans are going to do the same with Democrats. And then you're going to have that sliver of people who don't identify as D or R in those 5 swing states. And that is what it's going to come down to. And age is not, although people think it is, on the ballot. It isn't. It isn't a kitchen table issue.
We should probably also point out that that same AP poll found that a majority of people think that there should be a maximum age limit to run for Congress, and that there should also be a retirement age for Supreme Court justices. Thank goodness they weren't asked about news anchors. It's been 6 days since the first GOP presidential debate. Look at where the candidates stand right now. Former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley with the biggest post-debate bump. Former Vice President Mike Pence and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also saw slight increases. Former President Trump taking a hit in his numbers after skipping that contest. So, Charlie, as the former president looks toward the next debate on Fox Business on September the 27th at the Reagan Library, and I know he doesn't like the curator of the library a whole lot and says he's not going to come, might he look at those numbers and say, ooh, I cannot afford to not show up?
Well, I think that, speaking purely politically, strategically from Donald Trump's standpoint, he probably looks at those numbers and sees that feels comfortable with it. The only one in that poll, and I'm always very suspicious of polling, especially polling about, some event like this. It just sort of, it's a very hard science to put your finger on. But the only person who moved within that poll beyond the margin of error was Nikki Haley. And so I think that if you're Donald Trump and you're looking at this, you're probably seeing the fact that Ron DeSantis did not move in any way outside of the margin of error. And since everybody has sort of anointed Ron DeSantis as the person who is supposed to take down Donald Trump in the primary, he probably looks at this and sees this as being as going to plan, because anything that sort of keeps the field broad and flat helps Donald Trump.
Right. I know, Leslie, that the Biden campaign is hoping that the opponent is Donald Trump, and they're looking to award a rematch for 2020. But these elections are all about momentum. And when one candidate begins to catch fire, and maybe it's Nikki Haley, maybe it's Vivek Ramaswamy, maybe it's Tim Scott, things can change quite quickly. And we've got a long time between now and the first caucuses in January. So does Donald Trump potentially look at this and say, there are some people who are beginning to come up on the inside rail, and maybe I need to be out there a little more prominently than I have been?
He should be out there more prominently regardless of a bump in the polls, which a debate does for, a lot of candidates. Vivek Ramaswamy, he actually had a drop after the debate. It wasn't his best night. And although Nikki Haley had the largest bump, 7% is a long way from where Donald Trump is, even though Donald Trump had the biggest drop not being there. You got to show up, right? Isn't that, 90% of the job is showing up? And you got to show up. Also because Donald Trump is one of those people who sucks all the oxygen out of the room. So being in a debate with all of these people actually benefits him. It gives his base what they want, that bravado, those attacks that he gives. And that was an opportunity for him that was missed, but it was an opportunity for others to shine, not only with policy. I think Nikki Haley, ironically, who wants retirement age to be increased for younger people, but Nikki Haley, I think, as a Democrat, shined when she talked about abortion and how they need to be pro-life but pro-women. I also think there was the likability factor, and that's something that Governor DeSantis has struggled with before the debate stage and did even more so. But at the end of the day, Nikki Haley's 7% is a long way from becoming the nominee. Donald Trump still is leading by a large margin.
It is, but let's not forget, in the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump at one point was at 1%, and that changed, as we all know. Leslie Marshall, Charlie Hurt, good to catch up with you. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.